There's no elegant way to describe what it feels like when your own son wishes you were dead. There's no metaphor, no word that can soften that edge. Something inside you just breaks, and nothing ever sounds the same again. That morning, as I was quietly drinking my coffee, I heard my phone buzz on the table. It was a Facebook notification. I don't usually look at that stuff. I barely know how to use it. But something, a gut feeling, or maybe the instinct of an old man who still refuses to completely die, made me open it. I saw a photo of myself. It was a picture taken in the backyard, sitting in my usual armchair, wearing the old shirt I used to water the plants. Nothing strange so far, but the text underneath it, that text stole the air from my lungs. If this old man would just die, my life would be perfect. They were my son's words, written publicly, accompanied by laughing emojis and mocking reactions. And even though I tried to tell myself it was just a cruel joke, something in me knew instantly that it wasn't. Because behind that sentence, there wasn't humor. There was poison. And poison always comes from where it hurts the most, from your own blood. I stared at the screen for several minutes. I didn't feel anger at first, just a kind of emptiness that made my hands go cold. I wanted to write to him, to ask him why, but I deleted the message before sending it. What was the point? What answer could I expect from someone who no longer considered me part of his life? That post was shared, commented on, turned into a joke among his friends. I, the old man, the burden, the useless one, the one who raised him alone after his mother died, who fed him with hands cracked from hard work, was now a source of shame, of hatred. I closed the phone calmly, took a breath, and stood up slowly. And for the first time in my life, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I suddenly understood that it wasn't worth shedding tears for someone who had already decided to bury his father while he was still alive. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you're subscribed to the channel and if you're enjoying this story. This helps me see that you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. Hours passed, maybe a whole day, without me saying a word. That night, I barely slept. I replayed every word in my mind, every memory, every gesture that had led us to this point. I remembered when he was a little boy and would hug me after a nightmare, when he'd run after me yelling, "Dad, wait up!" I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike, how he cried when his mother died and swore he would never leave me alone. I remembered everything, and it hurt even more. I couldn't understand at what point the love had turned into contempt, at what point the son I raised with everything I had became a stranger capable of humiliating me in front of the world. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I loved him too much. Maybe I never taught him to be grateful. For years, I defended him from everything, from teachers, from neighbors, from his own mistakes. I gave him everything I had, money, time, patience. And yet, I lost him anyway. Not because he left, but because he stopped seeing me. And when a son stops seeing his father, it's like they both die a little. The next day, I pretended nothing had happened. I made breakfast, like always. The coffee, the toast, the newspaper folded on the table. He came downstairs, cell phone in hand, laughing with someone on a call. He didn't even look at me. He just said, "Hey, send me a transfer, Dad. I gotta pay for something." Not a good morning, not a please. I told him I would, in the most neutral voice I could manage, but inside me, something was already brewing. A cold, calculated thought, not of revenge, but of justice. The kind of justice that doesn't make noise but leaves a mark. When he left, I stared at his empty mug, and that's when I decided. No more begging, no more excuses, no more letting him treat me like a piece of old furniture. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out a folder with bank papers. The joint account, the one that held all my savings, the fruit of more than 40 years of work. 40 years that can't be erased by a cowardly post on social media. I smiled, not with joy, but with calm, with the serenity that only comes to someone who has lost all fear. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. I made an appointment for the next day, and as I spoke with him, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. I was finally going to stop being the man everyone had written off. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No guilt, no tears. Just the certainty that sometimes Life gives you the chance to teach one last lesson, and when it comes, you have to take it. Because even the most patient fathers have a limit, and I had just reached mine. They say a father's love is unbreakable, that no matter what happens, you always forgive. But that's not entirely true, because there are wounds not caused by life, but by disappointment. And disappointment comes from those you least expect. Sometimes I wonder when it all started. What was the exact moment my son stopped seeing me as his father and started seeing me as a burden? No matter how hard I look, I can't find a single date. I think it was a lot of little things. Accumulated silences, averted glances, sharp answers. Cracks don't appear all at once. They form over the years, just like loneliness. I remember the first few days after his mother died. He was 8 years old. I didn't know how to go on without her. I would sit on the bed with my head in my hands with no strength for anything. And he, with his little boy voice, would wrap his arms around my neck and say, "Don't cry, Dad. Mom's in heaven, but we're still here." Those words were the only thing that kept me on my feet. I worked all day, sometimes into the night, so he wouldn't lack anything. I made him breakfast, took him to school, waited for him afterward. And even if I came home exhausted, I made time to listen to his stories, look at his drawings, hear his laughter, his questions. I lived for him. He was my engine, my reason for existing. When he became a teenager, things changed a bit. He didn't want to talk to me as much. He'd close his bedroom door, listen to loud music, and go out with friends I didn't know. Sometimes he'd come home late, smelling of cigarettes, and I'd ask for an explanation. He would laugh, tell me I was overreacting, that I didn't understand anything, and I would stay quiet because I was afraid of losing him if I pushed too hard. Now I understand that was my first mistake. The silence. The silence I let grow between us because I was afraid he'd reject me. Parents have fears too, even if we don't say it. We're afraid of not being enough, afraid our kids will see us as old, clumsy, out of place. The day he graduated was the last day I saw him truly happy with me. When he walked onto the stage and got his diploma, he looked for me in the crowd and smiled. I still remember that smile. It was one of pride, of gratitude. I cried, hiding so he wouldn't see me. I thought everything I had done for him was worth it, but little by little, things started to go sour. He got his first job, started dating a girl from a wealthy family, and suddenly, my presence embarrassed him. One time, I met him at a restaurant where he was with his friends. As soon as he saw me, he got up and pretended not to know me. "Dad, you didn't have to come," he said through his teeth, annoyed. "Don't let people see you like this in those clothes." I remember smiling, pretending not to understand, and said, "I just wanted to give you this." I handed him an envelope with some money. I know beginnings are tough. He took it without looking me in the eye. That night when I got home, I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw my wrinkles, my cracked hands, the accumulated exhaustion, and for the first time, I felt old. Not because of my age, but because my son had made me feel useless, as if everything I was, everything I had done, no longer had any value. The following weeks were a parade of indifference. Every time he called, it was to ask for money, never to ask how I was, never to ask if I was eating well or if I was lonely. Just transfers, bills, excuses, and I, like a fool, kept sending what little I had. Because parents, even wounded ones, keep taking care of things, even when no one takes care of us. One day I suggested we have lunch together, like we used to. He said he couldn't, he was busy. I insisted. I reminded him we hadn't seen each other in months. His response was a dry laugh. "Dad, stop acting like a kid. I have a life." That sentence cut right through me. I didn't argue. I just hung up, and I stared at the phone, feeling that something between us had definitively ended. From then on, we spoke very little. Family holidays became silent. He always found an excuse not to come, and when he did, he arrived with his phone in his hand, looking at everything with annoyance. He wasn't my son anymore. He was a stranger who shared my last name and my face, but not my soul. I kept waiting for him. Parents always wait. We believe that love is a boomerang, that sooner or later it comes back. But sometimes it never does. And then came the post. The damned post. And I understood that all those cracks I had pretended not to see for years had now become an abyss, one you can't come back from. That night, I sat in the darkness of the living room. The clock struck 11, and every tick-tock sounded like a reproach. I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it to my wife's photo, and spoke to her in a low voice. I failed Helen. I gave him everything, and I still lost him. I thought I heard her voice in the silence, or maybe it was my conscience. You can still teach him, Alex, but not with words. And I knew she was right. Words are useless when ears are closed. It was time to speak with actions, to teach him what a father is really worth when the money is gone. That was the night the pain transformed into something else, into a dangerous calm, into a serenity that only comes when you've already decided on the end of the road. I wasn't looking for revenge, only justice. And justice sometimes dresses in silence. The night I decided to invite him to dinner, I knew something was going to break. I wasn't expecting reconciliation. I just wanted to hear his voice without the interference of a screen, to see his eyes, even if I no longer recognized the boy in them who once called me his hero. I prepared everything just as his mother used to when she was still alive. The table set with care, the good china, the tablecloth I saved for special occasions. I cooked his favorite dish, pot roast with potatoes and red wine. As the aroma filled the house, I caught myself humming an old tune, one the three of us used to sing when we were still a family. For a moment, I almost felt like everything would be okay again. But no. Sometimes hope is just cruelty disguised as habit. He arrived late, as always. Not a good evening, not a hug. Just a, "What is it now, Dad? Don't tell me you're sick or something." His voice was a razor's edge. It hurt, but I didn't show it. I pointed to the table. "Sit down, son. I want to talk to you." He frowned. "Talk about what? About us?" He sat down reluctantly, checking his watch. For several minutes we ate in silence. The sound of the silverware was the only thing that filled the room. I tried to remember every gesture of his, every kind word from other times, but I couldn't find any. It was like looking at a stranger. "I saw what you posted," I finally said, my voice calm. He didn't look up. "So? I just wanted to understand why." He laughed, a dry, almost cruel laugh. "Are you really going to get sensitive over some stupid thing on the internet? It was a joke, Dad." "A joke?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "Saying your life would be perfect if I died. That's a joke?" "Don't be so dramatic," he replied. "You're always saying you're tired of everything yourself. Maybe I'd be doing you a favor." I looked at him for a long time. I didn't answer. I just observed him. He had my eyes, my way of moving his hands, even my way of frowning. He was my distorted reflection. And that hurt more than his words. "Your mother would be disappointed," I said quietly. "Don't bring her into this. She gave her life for you, just like I did. You didn't give me anything, Dad. Everything I have, I got on my own." That sentence pierced me like a stake. I remembered the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the worn-out shoes, the hunger hidden behind a smile so he wouldn't notice. But I said nothing. Because what's the use in defending yourself when the one hurting you has already decided not to listen? The silence became thick, uncomfortable. I could hear the clock ticking off the seconds between each breath. Then he put his silverware down on the plate and leaned toward me. "Look, old man, I don't want to sound cruel, but you're getting old. You have no idea how the world works anymore. Just live your life and leave me alone. So that's what you think of me. That's what it is." He stood up from the table. I remained seated, looking at the pot roast that had already gone cold. I didn't feel anger or the urge to scream. Just a strange calm. The calm that comes when you understand there's nothing left to save. "Your mother used to say that respect isn't taught with words," I said, almost to myself. "Another life lesson? Save the speech, Dad. I don't need your advice." "No, son. It's not advice. It's a goodbye." He turned toward me, confused. "What?" "Nothing. Eat something before you go." "I'm not hungry." "Suit yourself." I watched him walk to the door. Before leaving, he said without looking at me, "And please, stop checking my social media. You're embarrassing me." He closed the door, and with that slam, Everything that was left between us closed too. I was left alone at the table. The wine had a bitter, almost metallic taste. The clock kept marking time, relentless, mocking. I thought about his childhood, about the rainy days when he would curl up on my chest, how his small hand would search for mine to feel safe. And now, those same hands had written a sentence wishing for my death. I turned off the lights. The silence of the house was so vast I could hear my own thoughts. I went to the study, opened the desk drawer, and took out a blank sheet of paper. I wrote the date and began a letter. Son, I don't blame you. I understand you. Life taught you to despise what you thought was weak, and I became that for you. Weakness. But someday you will understand that there is no greater strength than that of a father who stays silent. I'm not looking for an apology. I just want you to learn what I never had the courage to teach you, the value of respect. I put the letter away without signing it. It wasn't time yet. The revenge I had in mind wasn't written with ink, but with actions. I went to the mirror and looked at myself. I saw my tired but living eyes. For the first time in a long time, I recognized myself. I was no longer the defeated man hiding behind love. I was a father who had decided to get his dignity back. That night, I slept little, but when the sun rose, it came through the window, and something inside me changed. I got dressed in my old suit, the one for important occasions, and headed for the bank. Because when a son forgets where he comes from, destiny has a way of reminding him. And this time, destiny was going to have my signature. I had never woken up with so much determination. The sun was barely up, and the air still smelled like night, but I was already on my feet, wearing the same gray suit I wore the day my son graduated. I looked at it in the mirror before leaving, the jacket a bit worn, the cuffs marked by the years. I adjusted my tie and thought, ironically, that this was the outfit I had chosen to celebrate his success. And now I would use it to erase him from my bank account. As I walked to the bank, I felt something I hadn't recognized in a long time. Power. Not the power of money or of revenge. It was the power of knowing that, for the first time, I wasn't going to let myself be walked over anymore. The sky was gray, the streets almost empty. I walked into the bank at 8 a.m. sharp, with a firm step, without looking at anyone. The teller at the front desk recognized me right away. "Good morning, Mr. Mendez. Here to make a withdrawal?" "No," I replied, looking her in the eyes. "I'm here to close a chapter." I waited, sitting. Across from me, a young family was filling out forms, laughing. The father was hugging his little girl and showing her some new bills. That image hit me. For a second, I saw a younger version of myself in that man, and in that little girl, the son who had once looked at me with the same admiration. I swallowed hard and looked away. When they finally called my name, I went into the manager's office. He was a man my age, with a firm handshake and a calm voice. We had known each other for years. He had witnessed me opening that joint account with my son, proud, believing it was the first step of his maturity. "Alex," he said, shaking my hand, "what brings you in?" I took a deep breath. "I need to make a change of ownership." "On the family account?" I nodded. He frowned. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I lied. "Everything's fine. I just need to organize some things." He opened his computer and asked for my documents. As he typed, he looked at me over his glasses. "And is your son aware of this?" "No," I said without hesitation, "and I'd prefer he not be." The silence that followed was dense, almost solemn. The manager nodded without further questions. He just passed me some papers to sign. My hands were trembling slightly, but I managed to write my name with the same calm one feels when closing a book you've read too many times. When I finished, he looked at me with quiet respect. "Alex, these decisions are heavy." "I know," I replied, "but humiliation is heavier." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. We could only hear the hum of the air conditioning. Finally, the manager said, "It's done. As of today, the account is solely in your name." "Thank you. Should we change the access codes?" "Yes," I said without flinching, "everything." I signed the last documents and put the new cards in my wallet. The plastic still smelled new, but to me, it smelled like justice. Leaving the bank, the air seemed lighter. The clouds had parted a bit and sunlight fell on the sidewalk. I walked aimlessly, as if my feet were guiding me. I sat on a park bench and opened my notebook. I started writing. I didn't know exactly what, I just felt the need to do it. Today I got back what I thought I'd lost: my voice. For years I confused love with obedience, patience with submission. I gave my life to someone who didn't want it, and still, it hurt me more to lose his respect than his affection. But today I understood something. Respect isn't inherited. It's demanded. And silence isn't kindness. It's cowardice. I put the notebook away. The sound of nearby laughter made me look up. 2 young people walked by, holding hands, talking about futures and promises. I felt like warning them that life doesn't always keep the promises you make with your heart. But I stayed quiet. Let them learn, I thought. We all learn when it hurts. On the way home, I passed a store where I used to buy my son gifts. The same watches, the same cologne, the same useless gestures he always rejected with coldness. I went in anyway. I asked the salesman for an empty box with a gold ribbon. "A special gift?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, "for a birthday that will never come." That afternoon, I got home with the box under my arm. I placed it on the dining room table and looked at it for several minutes. It was beautiful, shiny. On the outside, it looked like it held love. On the inside, it only held air. It seemed perfect, a symbol. My son was going to receive his own reflection. I took out a piece of paper and wrote, "Inside this box is exactly what you left me, son. Nothing." I put the paper inside and closed it. That night I slept well, for the first time in years. The next day, my son went to the bank. I didn't know it from him, but from the furious call I received a few hours later. "What did you do, Dad? The money isn't in my name. I don't have access to anything." I stayed silent. I could hear the panic in his voice. For the first time, he was the one not in control. "Dad, answer me. What did you do?" "Nothing," I said calmly. "I just corrected a mistake." "You're selfish. All that money was mine." "No, son," I replied. "It was ours. And you turned it into shame." He hung up without saying goodbye. Minutes later, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. I turned the phone off and stared out the window, watching the afternoon fade. The sky had an orange tint, just like the afternoons when he was little and ran through the yard, and I found myself smiling, though sadly. Because sometimes the greatest love isn't shown by giving, but by taking away. Taking away the power from the one who abuses it, taking away the privilege from the one who humiliates, taking away everything so they learn what nothing is really worth. And as the sun set behind the trees, I knew that what had started as a wound had just become a lesson. It was 2 days after I closed the account before the phone rang. I knew it would happen. I knew as soon as he discovered the magnitude of what I had done, he would look for me. But I didn't imagine his voice would sound like that. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. "Dad," he yelled as soon as I answered, "what the hell did you do? The bank says the account is blocked. I don't have access to anything." I let him talk. His voice was a whirlwind of rage and desperation. I could picture him pacing back and forth, phone pressed to his ear, sweating. I remained silent. After so many years, it was my turn to listen without responding. "Dad?" he repeated louder. "Answer me." "I'm here," I finally said. "What did you do with my money?" "Your money?" I repeated calmly, letting each word hang in the air. "I don't remember seeing you work to earn it." "It was mine. You told me yourself that account was for both of us." "It was, yes? Until you stopped being my son?" The silence that followed was icy. I could hear his breathing get heavier. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I no longer have any obligations to you. That every insult, every taunt, every word you threw at me as if it didn't hurt, today has its answer." "You can't do this to me." "I already did." For a few seconds, he didn't speak. Then his tone changed. The anger morphed into pleading. "Dad, please, I have no way to pay my rent or to fill up my car. You know I'm going through a rough time." I closed my eyes. For an instant, his voice reminded me of the boy he was, the one who ran barefoot in the yard and asked for help to reach his kite. But I opened my eyes and remembered the photo, the post, the sentence. If this old man would just die. We all have rough times, son, but not all of us wish death on the one who helped us avoid them. I didn't mean it, Dad. You know what I'm like. I joke about everything. Yes, I know what you're like. And I also know that jokes show what the heart doesn't dare to say. He went quiet. I could imagine his jaw tightening, his eyes full of fury. He never could stand it when I spoke to him without raising my voice, because the calm disarmed him more than yelling. Give me another chance, he finally said. I promise I'll change. No, son, no, I replied. You ask for chances before you destroy what you love, not after. You're cruel, he spat. Ungrateful. If it weren't for me, you'd be alone. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. I already am alone, but at least now it's a dignified loneliness. He hung up. The sharp click of the phone left me with a strange, almost sweet peace. I stared at the device for a long time. I didn't feel guilt. I felt relief. It was as if every word of contempt he had thrown at me for years had dissolved in that final silence. But the calm didn't last long. That same night, he called again. I didn't pick up. He called again, and again, and again. 54 times. Yes, I counted them. Each ring was like a dull knock on the door of my conscience. 54 times, the same person who had forgotten me 1,000 times was looking for me. On the 55th call, I answered. I said nothing. I just listened to his ragged breathing. Dad. His voice was now a broken whisper. Forgive me. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't want to lose you. That sentence, said so many times by other sons, and so few times by mine. It tore my soul apart. But I had learned that love without respect doesn't redeem. It only weakens. You didn't lose me today, son. You lost me the day you laughed at me in front of everyone. The day you looked at me with disgust, thinking you were superior. The day you forgot who taught you how to walk. Dad, don't talk like that, please. I don't hate you, son, I interrupted in a low voice, but I don't love you in the same way either. When love rots, it turns into distance, and that's what we are now. Distance. From the other end of the line, there was a sob. Short, choked, almost childish. For an instant, I had the urge to tell him I forgave him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I remembered what it cost me to get to this point. I remembered the nights of humiliation, the times I pretended not to hear just to keep from breaking. And I understood that forgiving him so quickly would be like becoming a slave to his contempt all over again. Goodbye, son, I said simply. May life teach you what I no longer can. I hung up. This time, there were no tremors, no tears. Just a strange sensation, a mix of sadness and liberation. The phone rang a couple more times, but I didn't answer. I went out onto the balcony, looked at the night sky, and breathed deeply. The cold air hit my face, but I felt alive. After so much time, I felt alive. I poured myself a whiskey, turned on the old lamp in the living room, and opened my notebook. I wrote a single sentence. Sometimes, loving also means closing the door, and I underlined it. Hard. Because that night, I understood that revenge isn't always shouted. Sometimes it's pronounced with the exact tone of a goodbye. They say that after a great storm comes silence, a different kind of silence, thick, one that doesn't scare you but doesn't comfort you either. That's how that week was. A strange calm took over the house, the phone, my mind. Not a call, not a message, not a word. It was as if the world had decided to grant me a reprieve. The first few days, it was hard to get used to. Every time the phone rang, or the doorbell chimed, or I heard the distant sound of the mail truck, my heart would race, afraid it was him again. But time did its work, and the anxiety turned into stillness. There was something healing in that silence, a peace I had never felt before. I started to pick up small, forgotten habits, reading in the mornings, taking care of the plants, making coffee without rushing. Loneliness, when it's chosen, can be a refuge. I no longer needed to justify my existence to anyone, or prove that I was still useful. I could just be. One Friday afternoon, I went for a walk in the park where I used to take my son as a child. I hadn't set foot in that place for years. Everything had changed. The benches were new, the concession stand was closed, and in place of the old oak tree, there was a modern fountain with colored lights. And yet, something was the same, the echo of his laughter. I closed my eyes, and for an instant, I heard him running after a ball, his cheeks red and his voice full of life. The memory was so vivid, I had to sit down. I thought, at what point did our love break? But before the nostalgia could drag me down, I remembered our last conversation, the coldness in his voice, the way he hung up, and I understood that not everything that breaks deserves to be repaired. Days later, I ran into a neighbor who knew my son. She was a talkative woman, the kind who knows more than she should. "Mr. Mendez," she said cautiously, "did you hear what happened with your boy?" My stomach clenched. "What happened?" "Seems he got fired from his job. They say he had a big argument with his boss, and his wife left him." I kept silent, not because I wasn't surprised, but because I didn't know what to feel. She looked at me, waiting for a reaction, some word of sorrow, but I said nothing. I just nodded. "You see," she added, "life always puts everyone in their place." "Sometimes," I replied simply. "Sometimes it just does it late." That night when I got home, I stood in front of the window for a long time. The city lights flickered like intermittent memories. I didn't feel joy at what I'd heard. I didn't feel sadness either. It was something else, a kind of serene resignation, a bitter understanding that destiny doesn't need our help to serve justice. I poured a coffee and sat in the armchair where I used to read him stories when he was little. On the side table, there was still a photo from his childhood, him on my shoulders, laughing, with his hands stretched to the sky. I picked it up and studied it. The paper was yellowed, the corners bent. With my other hand, I touched the edge as if I could go back. But you can't go back. Love, when it's used carelessly, rusts just like everything else. That night, I dreamed of him. In the dream, he was little again. He was hugging me and saying, "I'm sorry, Dad." I tried to answer, but I couldn't speak. I woke up sweating, my heart racing. I looked at the clock. 3:30 in the morning. The silence was absolute. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to respect the moment. I turned on the lamp and wrote in my notebook, "Silence is the sound of consequences." The next morning, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized his handwriting as soon as I saw it. It was shaky, clumsy, as if it had been written through tears. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the table and stared at it for hours. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading it. Another part needed to. Finally, I opened it. It was just a few lines. "Dad, forgive me. I didn't know how to measure my words or my actions. I lost everything, and now I understand that you were the only thing I shouldn't have lost. If you still see me as your son, come find me. I'm where the oak tree used to be. Rick." I read the letter several times. The oak tree didn't exist anymore. They had replaced it with a fountain, but I understood the message. It was symbolic. It was a clumsy attempt to return to the beginning. I put the letter in my pocket and left without thinking too much. When I got to the park, the sun was setting, and the lights of the fountain were slowly turning on. I saw him there, sitting on a bench, head down, clothes wrinkled, with a lost look in his eyes. For a moment, I hesitated to approach him, not out of resentment, but out of fear. Fear that it would all happen again. But something inside me, maybe his mother's voice, pushed me forward. I walked slowly until I was standing in front of him. He didn't look up. He just said, his voice broken, "I didn't expect you to come." I sat down next to him without replying. The silence wrapped around us, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of resentment. It was the silence of exhaustion, the silence of two souls who had already said everything with their eyes. After a few minutes, he murmured, "I'm not looking for your forgiveness, Dad. I just wanted you to hear me out one more time." "I'm listening, son," I replied. "I messed up. Everything I touched I destroyed, and now I have nothing." I looked at his hands, the same hands that once held my tools when I was teaching him to work. Now they were trembling. And for the first time in a long time, I felt compassion, not for his pain, but for his recovered humanity. "Sometimes losing everything," I said, "is the only way to understand what's really worth something." He didn't answer. He just nodded. And in his eyes, I saw something I thought was extinct: humility. We stayed like that, in silence, watching the park lights reflect on the fountain's water. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It was peace. Peace after the thunder. There are silences that weigh more than screams. That was the silence that enveloped us after that meeting in the park. Neither he nor I knew how to fill the air with something that didn't hurt. We looked at each other. We breathed, and we let time do what words couldn't. When I got home, I felt empty. Not because I had seen him in a bad way, but because I had seen him as human, with sunken eyes, broken pride, and trembling hands. And it was right then, remembering those hands, that something inside me began to crack. For years, my hands had worked for him. The same hands that lifted him when he fell, that held his bike when he was learning to pedal, that wiped his forehead when a fever made him delirious. Now, it was his hands that were trying to hold on to something that was no longer there. That hurt me more than any past insult. Resentment sometimes is just another form of wounded love. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the armchair, looking at the letter he had left me. I read it one more time, slowly, word for word, as if I could find in it the same tone of repentance I saw in his eyes. I found it. It was there, hidden between the clumsy lines. In the morning, without thinking too much, I made 2 cups of coffee. I didn't know if he would come, but the aroma of fresh coffee had always been the easiest bridge between us, and, as if destiny still had a sense of humor, I heard the doorbell. It was him, standing there, hands in his pockets, looking down. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He entered slowly, like someone stepping into a stranger's house. The silence followed us to the table. I pointed to the mug. "Coffee? How you like it?" "Thanks, Dad." He hadn't called me Dad in years. That simple word hit me with the force of a memory that refuses to die. We drank without speaking. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the wind against the window. Finally he said, "I didn't come to ask for money." "I know. I came to ask for something harder." I looked at him. His eyes were watering, but not with anger. "I came to ask for your forgiveness." My heart skipped a beat. It was a phrase I had waited years to hear. But when I finally heard it, I didn't know what to do with it. Because forgiveness, when it comes late, doesn't heal. It just opens the wound you had learned to cover. "Dad," he continued, "I was an idiot. I thought being strong meant stepping on others and that showing affection was weakness. But I was wrong." His voice broke. "I lost my job, I lost my wife, and I almost lost you." "Almost," I said, still looking at him, "but you're still here." We fell silent. He lowered his head, and when he looked up again, his eyes were full of tears. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he murmured. "Maybe not," I replied calmly. "But forgiveness isn't deserved, son. It's either given or it's not." I got up, walked to the window, and looked at the yard. The rosebush his mother had planted years ago was blooming again, despite the neglect. Maybe love was like that, something that insists on being reborn even if no one waters it. "Do you know what the hardest part of being a father is?" I asked without turning around. "What?" "Learning to forgive without forgetting. And can you do that?" I turned. I saw him standing, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I can try." He approached me, slowly, and hugged me. It wasn't a strong hug, it was clumsy, restrained, almost fearful. His hands trembled on my back. And yet, that tremor told me more than any apology could. For an instant, I felt the boy I had raised, not the man who had humiliated me. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "Thank you for coming." We stayed like that, motionless, letting the silence speak for us. The clock struck 10:30, and the wind blew hard again, moving the curtains as if the house itself was breathing. In that moment, I knew something had changed. It wasn't a complete reconciliation or a happy ending. It was a fragile beginning, a crack where the possibility of healing was seeping through. When he left, I stared at his empty mug. The smell of coffee still hung in the air, mixed with something I hadn't recognized in years. Peace. I took my notebook and wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it lightens the soul to keep moving forward." Then I closed my eyes and smiled, because maybe after so much pain, that was all we needed. 2 trembling hands and the will to start over. I decided to invite him to dinner on a Thursday. I don't know why I chose that day. Maybe because Thursdays were always neutral. Not the exhaustion of Monday, not the hope of Sunday. Just a middle ground. Like us. I spent the afternoon making his favorite dish, roast chicken with potatoes, just like when he was a kid. As the aroma filled the kitchen, I found myself smiling. It was a timid smile, as if I was afraid of betraying myself. After all, forgiving doesn't erase the pain. It just covers it with a new tablecloth. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw him there, well-dressed with a fresh haircut and a bottle of wine in his hand. "I didn't know if you still liked this one," he said, holding it up with a half-smile. "I always liked it," I replied. "Come in." He entered with the same shyness that strangers have when entering a sacred place. His eyes scanned the living room, stopping on the details he remembered from his childhood. "Everything's still the same," he murmured. "Yeah," I said. "Some things don't need to change." We sat at the table. For a moment, the atmosphere was light. We made a toast, we ate, we talked about the weather, about work, about trivial things that served as a bridge between what we were and what was left. It seemed like a normal dinner. But beneath every word, a subtle tension floated, like a taut string that could snap at any moment. "Dad," he said suddenly, putting his fork down, "did you ever think we could go back to how we were before?" His question caught me by surprise. I took a sip of wine to buy time. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Sometimes things don't go back to how they were. They just transform." He nodded, looking at the glass between his fingers. "I guess you're right." There was a long silence. Then he spoke again, this time in a lower voice. "I can't stop thinking about everything I said, about the post, about how I treated you." "We already talked about that, son." "Yeah, but I don't think I apologized enough." "Forgiveness isn't measured in words," I told him. "It's shown in actions." He looked up, and in his gaze I saw something that stirred my soul. Gratitude. A sincere, disarmed, almost childish gratitude. I realized that the pride that had destroyed him was crumbling right in front of me. "I've been looking for a job," he told me. "Anything. I want to start from scratch, without depending on anyone." "That's good," I replied, feeling a slight pride that I didn't want to fully show. "And I also want to give you back some of what I owe you." "You don't owe me money, Rick." "I'm not talking about money," he said, looking at me intently. "I'm talking about respect." Those simple words shot through me like a silent lightning bolt. I felt a lump in my throat. For years I had longed to hear them, and now that they were right in front of me, I didn't know what to do. I just nodded. "That will be enough, son." We kept talking for a while longer. We laughed a little. We interrupted each other with old memories, as if we were trying to recover the lost language of family. For a moment, I had the feeling that everything could heal, but destiny, once again, had other plans. When we got up from the table, he went to the bathroom, and his phone was left on the chair. A notification lit up the screen. Without meaning to, or perhaps with too much curiosity, I glanced at it. A text message. "Just left his house. I'll explain everything tomorrow. He doesn't suspect a thing." I felt my blood run cold. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I opened the chat. The name at the top hit me like a slap in the face. Lydia. Legal advisor. My lawyer. My own lawyer. I didn't understand. I read the words over and over, looking for a less cruel meaning. But there wasn't one. My son hadn't just come to reconcile. He had come to get something. When he came back, I acted normal. "Everything okay, Dad?" he asked, seeing I was a bit pale. "Yes," I lied. "Everything's perfect." We ended the night with a forced hug. When he left, I stood by the closed door, my heart on fire. The sound of his footsteps fading away was like a mocking echo. I went back to the table. I picked up the old landline and dialed a number I knew well. "Hello?" my lawyer's sleepy voice answered. "Lydia works for you, right?" I asked, straight to the point. "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" "Because she was just at my house." The silence on the other end confirmed everything. I didn't need any more. I hung up. I sat down and took a deep breath. The forgiveness had lasted for one dinner and one lie. I looked at the empty table, the half-finished wine, the 2 glasses still warm. And I understood that maybe forgiveness isn't always a second chance. Sometimes it's just the perfect trap to see if the other person really changed, and my son hadn't. I took my notebook and wrote with a steady hand. There are wounds that forgiveness doesn't heal. It only disguises them. But when the mask falls, the wound bleeds again. I turned off the dining room light. Silence, once again, was my only guest. I didn't sleep that night. The sentence from the message turned over and over in my head. Just, left his house. I'll explain everything tomorrow. He doesn't suspect a thing. I read those words so many times I could almost hear them. He doesn't suspect a thing. The same casualness a thief has when turning off the light after robbing a place. I poured a bitter coffee and waited for sunrise. The silence of the house felt different, heavier, thicker, as if the walls knew something had broken again. When the clock struck 8, I was already at the bank. The manager greeted me with the same courtesy as always, but he sensed something in my face. "Everything all right, Alex?" he asked cautiously. "That depends," I replied. "I need to review the latest movements on my account." He nodded and led me to his office. He typed for a few seconds, frowned, and turned the screen toward me. There it was, an attempted access to my account the day before, right after the dinner. They had tried to transfer a large sum to a legal corporate account. The system had blocked the operation for lack of authorization. "Do you recognize this account?" the manager asked. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "It belongs to my lawyer." I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of nausea and vertigo. My son had planned everything. The dinner, the apology, the hug. It was all part of a show to win my trust, get access to my documents, and get my signature or my passwords. The pain was so deep, it was hard to breathe. The manager offered me a glass of water. "Do you want us to report the attempt?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to handle this my way." I left the bank, my heart pounding. The air burned my lungs. I walked aimlessly for hours, trying to understand at what point I had lost him again. Maybe I never got him back. Maybe that hug in the park was just an illusion for both of us. Me, wanting to be a father again, and him, wanting to be the son he was pretending to be. I got home and sat at the desk. I turned on the lamp. I opened the notebook and wrote, "Love isn't measured by the times you forgive, but by the exact point at which you stop." Then I took a deep breath and picked up the phone. I dialed the number of the law firm. A secretary answered. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson's office." "I need to speak with Mr. Johnson," I said, controlling the tremble in my voice. "It's urgent." Minutes later, his deep, measured voice filled the line. "Alex, how are you?" "Bad," I replied. "Very bad. I need you to check something." I explained what had happened. The attempted transfer, the text message, the dinner. There was a tense silence. "Lydia," the lawyer murmured, "I don't like what you're saying. She's worked with me for years." "And she works with you," I interrupted. "Not for me, but she was at my house yesterday." "That can't be." "It was. I have proof." His tone of voice changed. "I'm going to look into this. I'll call you as soon as I have something." I hung up and stared at the phone. I knew I wasn't going to like what he discovered, but I also knew that this time I wasn't going to break. Not again. That afternoon, Mr. Johnson called me back. "Alex, you were right," he said, his voice grave. "I found messages between them." "Messages?" "Yes. Your son offered Lydia money to help him create a legal document." "What kind of document?" "A power of attorney. They were going to pass it off as a routine bank form. If you had signed it, you would have given him total access to your assets." I felt a knot in my stomach. For a second, I was speechless. The world was collapsing on me again. But I didn't cry. Not anymore. Tears are for people who are still hoping for something. I, on the other hand, had already learned to let go. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," I said finally. "Don't do anything yet." "What are you planning to do?" "What I didn't do the first time. Teach him that my silence is not weakness." I hung up and sat in the dim light, looking out the window. The sky was gray, just like that morning when I decided to go to the bank. But this time, the gray didn't oppress me. It was different. It was a gray that signaled a storm, one that I myself was about to unleash. That night, I wrote a letter, not to him but to me, a letter that began like this. Dear Alex, you forgave too much. You believed that loving was enduring, that blood was thicker than dignity. But you were wrong. Love is not begged for. It's offered. And if it's betrayed, it's withdrawn with your head held high. Tomorrow, you are going to teach your son what it means to lose everything without raising your voice. I put the letter in the drawer. I prepared a folder with documents, copies of bank transactions, and a printed copy of the message I had read on his phone. When I finished, I took a deep breath. My revenge wasn't going to be to scream. It was going to be to show him what it costs to betray the one who gave you life. The next morning, I called Mr. Johnson. I want to draft a new document, I told him. About the account? No, about my will. Silence, then a single phrase from the other end. I understand. I hung up, and as I closed my notebook, I knew that this time there would be no turning back. Because a father can forgive one offense, but not two from the same heart. Signing a will isn't as hard as you imagine. The hard part is writing it without your heart breaking. I arrived at Mr. Johnson's office at 9 in the morning. The air smelled of new paper and fresh coffee, but also of finality. I greeted him with a handshake, and without much preamble, I said, "Let's do this today." He led me to his office, closed the door, and offered me a seat. His face, always calm, showed a concern he was trying to hide. "Alex, are you absolutely sure about this?" "More than ever," I replied without hesitation. He took a folder from his drawer and placed it on the table. Inside were the drafts we had quietly prepared the night before. The document was long, but my decision fit on a single line. To revoke any and all inheritance rights of Rick Mendez to my assets, accounts, and properties. I asked him to let me read it one last time. Every word was a sharp but necessary blow. As my eyes moved over the lines, I felt something in me close for good, like a door being barred from the inside. "Do you want to leave any additional notes or explanation?" Johnson asked. I nodded. I took an envelope from my pocket and put it on the table. "Yes, this. I want this delivered along with the reading of the will." "What does it contain?" "Just a truth he needs to read with his heart, not with his eyes." The lawyer nodded without asking more. He called in 2 witnesses, and we proceeded to sign. As my pen glided over the paper, I felt a strange calm. It wasn't joy or sadness. It was the feeling of finally being in control of my own destiny. When it was all over, Johnson closed the folder and looked at me with respect. "It's never easy to cut ties of blood, Alex." "I'm not cutting them," I replied. "I'm just stop feeding them." I left the office and walked to the park, the same park with the oak tree, the same one where I had seen my son cry for the first time. The wind was blowing hard, lifting dry leaves that spun around me as if celebrating an invisible change. I sat on the same bench as always. I took out my notebook and wrote, "Sometimes justice doesn't come from a judge or a punishment. It comes when your heart stops trembling in front of the one who betrayed it." The days passed and he didn't call. Not a message, not a visit. I knew he must be plotting something, or maybe he already sensed what I had done. And that uncertainty was part of my revenge, letting him live with the doubt. Because the hardest punishment isn't losing something. It's not knowing when exactly you lost it. A week later, I got a call from Mr. Johnson. "Alex, I think you should come in. Your son has been hanging around the office. He asked for Lydia, and when he found out we fired her, he got furious." "Let him," I said. "Let him get desperate. Silence teaches too." That night, however, I felt heavy, not with guilt, but with memory. I went to the closet and pulled out an old box full of photographs. There he was, with his mother, as a child, laughing on the beach, sand stuck to his face. Me behind the camera, immortalizing moments that now seemed like they were from another life. Each photo was a broken mirror, and in every piece, I could see what we once were. Among the photos, I found an old letter written by my wife shortly before she died. Her handwriting was soft, round, with that tone only mothers know how to use. It said, "If Rick ever gets lost, don't look for him with reproaches. Look for him with love. Don't raise him with punishment, but with example. And if it ever hurts too much, remember he was your little boy too." I read it 3 times. Then, I put it away again. My heart ached, but not like before. It was a mature pain, like a wound that has learned to live with the skin. The next morning, I went to the notary's office to file the final version of the will. As they stamped the documents, the sound of the seal felt like a sentence, not one against him, but one in favor of my peace. When I left, the sun was shining with a force that almost blinded me. I walked slowly home, with my head held high and my soul lighter than it had been in years. I had done the right thing, even though it hurt, because love without limits stops being love and becomes slavery. That afternoon, I received a text message on my phone. It was from him. It just said, "Dad, we need to talk. It's urgent." I didn't reply. I looked at the message for a long minute and deleted it without opening it. Not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to talk about. The time for forgiveness was over. Now, the time for consequences was beginning. I poured myself a glass of wine, looked out the window, and smiled faintly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim, or even an avenger, just a man who, after losing everything, had finally found himself. The pounding on the door was so loud I thought the wood was going to give way. It was almost 9 at night and I was getting ready for bed. I got up slowly, without rushing, like someone who already knows what they're going to find on the other side. I opened the door, and there he was. My son, Rick. His face flushed, his eyes wet, his breathing ragged. He had a crumpled envelope in his hand. "What did you do, Dad?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. I turned the page. "You wrote me out of the will." "I didn't write you out. I set you free." He pushed past me, furious, and threw the envelope on the table. "Set me free? From what? From the only thing I had left?" "You didn't have that left, son. You had your name, but you sold it for a few coins of pride." His eyes burned with rage. "Do you know how much I've suffered these past few months? I've lost everything, my job, my wife, my friends, and you did it all." "You did it all to yourself," I replied, serene. "I just decided to stop holding you up." He fell silent, breathing hard. For a moment, I thought he was going to cry, but instead, he slammed his fist on the table. "You're a miserable old man. You think you're a saint, but you're no better than me." "Maybe not," I admitted, "but I learned something you still don't understand. Not everything can be bought, son." "Shut up," he yelled, turning away. "You never gave me anything." That sentence, so repeated, so worn out, it cut through me one more time, but this time it didn't hurt. It just made me feel pity, because I understood suddenly that he was no longer speaking as a man. He was speaking as a child who never stopped demanding what he thought the world owed him. "I gave you nothing," I said slowly. "I only gave you my life. It was yours and you didn't know what to do with it." He spun around, his eyes shining with contained fury. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't been so weak, if you hadn't let Mom spoil me, I wouldn't be like this." It was the first time he had mentioned his mother in years. His voice broke when he said her name. And in that moment, behind all that rage, I saw something I didn't expect. Fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of facing himself. I approached him slowly, without raising my voice. "I'm not a perfect man, Rick. I was a father with flaws. Too many, maybe. But your flaws are your own now. Don't give me speeches, old man. You don't understand what it's like to fail." "Of course I do," I said, my voice thin. "Failure is raising a son who learns to hate the one who loved him." He froze. He looked down. His breathing became slow and regular. Finally, he murmured, "I just wanted you to look at me like you used to." That sentence broke me in a way no betrayal ever could, because in his voice there was no anger, no irony, no arrogance, just a lost boy looking for approval. "I always looked at you, son," I said, getting closer, "but you stopped looking back." "I know," he whispered, "and now it's too late." "It's never too late," I replied, "but this time I won't be giving forgiveness with words." I took the envelope from the drawer, the one I had prepared days before, the one that was attached to the will. I opened it and took out a folded sheet of paper. I held it out to him. "Read this." Trembling, he took it. As he did, his breathing hitched. He could barely read it aloud. He just murmured, "If you are ever reading this, it means I have decided to leave you the most valuable thing I have, the chance to change. I am not leaving you money, houses, or accounts. I am leaving you the weight of your own actions so you can learn to lighten it for yourself. And if you ever decide to honor my name, it won't be with riches, but with respect." When he finished, he folded the paper and clutched it to his chest. Tears fell without him trying to hide them, and I, without thinking, put a hand on his shoulder. Not as a father, not as a judge, as a man who understands that forgiveness sometimes is more of a duty than a desire. We stayed like that for a long time, until he, with a trembling voice, said, "I don't deserve any of this." "Maybe not," I said, "but a father's love is never earned. It's just given, or it ends." He nodded slowly. He stood up, put the envelope in his pocket, and went to the door. Before leaving, he turned around. "Will I ever be able to earn back your trust?" "That's up to you. But remember," I replied, "trust isn't asked for. It's built, with time and with clean hands." He closed the door without another word. The sound was soft, almost reverent. For the first time, there were no screams, no reproaches, no empty promises, just the feeling that maybe the cycle was finally closing. That night, I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's understanding that sometimes the punishment has already been enough." I turned off the lamp and let the darkness fill the room, not with sadness, but with something like peace. It's been 3 years since that night, 3 years in which the silence stopped hurting and started to make sense. The house doesn't seem so big anymore, nor the air so heavy. I've learned to live with the absence not as a punishment, but as a form of freedom. Sometimes when I get up early, I open the windows and let the breeze come in. The same breeze that moved the curtains that night my son cried in front of me. Now, in that same corner, a plant I potted the day I let him go is growing. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to remind myself that even what is broken can bloom again, if it's watered with silence. He never asked for my forgiveness again, but he also never hurt me again. And that, for me, was enough. One ordinary afternoon, while I was sorting through some old papers, the mailman knocked. He had an envelope with no return address. The postmark was from a week ago. I opened it calmly, with no expectations. Inside, there was a folded sheet of paper and a small photograph. In the photo, a little boy about 6 years old was smiling with his arms wide open in front of a bicycle. On the back, a dedication written in a handwriting I knew all too well. "For Grandpa Alex, thank you for giving the world a second chance with me. With love, your grandson, Julian." Below it, a postscript. "P.S. Dad says hi. He says he's still learning." I stood still, the photo between my fingers, as if time had stopped. I felt the air become lighter, something in my chest loosening. I didn't cry. I just smiled. With that mix of sadness and tenderness that only comes from a life truly lived. I went out to the yard and sat under the lemon tree. The sun was setting slowly on the leaves, and for the first time in a long time, I heard something different. The distant song of a child, laughing, playing, with a voice that sounded like his father's when he was little. It was an echo, or maybe a memory, but it was enough for me to understand that all the pain, all the distance, had been worth it. Because it's not about winning or losing, or having the last word. It's about leaving a trace of love that time can't completely erase. I took the photo, put it inside my notebook, and wrote with a steady hand. Life always comes back to speak to us in the voices of those we thought we'd lost, sometimes in the form of a son, and sometimes in the form of a grandson. I closed the notebook. The wind blew softly, moving the leaves of the tree. For an instant, I thought I heard my name spoken with affection, like in the old days. I looked up at the sky with a serene smile and whispered, "Thank you, son." And in that breath, I understood that forgiveness, in the end, wasn't an act. It was a journey. Sometimes life teaches us that forgiveness doesn't always repair what was broken, but it does allow us to keep breathing without resentment. If this story touched your heart, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. There are new stories every day, stories that remind us that even in the silence, love still has an echo.